My name is Helen Parker. I'm 67 years old, and I thought I knew my daughter better than anyone in the world. But on the night of her wedding, in a ballroom glittering with chandeliers and champagne, I heard words from her lips that cut deeper than anything I'd faced in my entire life. I was standing near the terrace doors, trying to stay out of the swirl of wealthy guests, when her voice carried over the music. Emily, my only child, the little girl I had raised on bedtime stories and peanut butter sandwiches, leaned close to her new mother-in-law and said, "Don't worry about her. She's nothing but a failure, not like you. She's never accomplished anything worth remembering." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass, and I felt the room tilt under my feet. A failure. After decades of double shifts at the town library, after nights spent balancing bills so she could go to summer camps and later college, after holding her hand through every heartbreak she'd ever had, this was what I had become to her: a burden, an embarrassment. I watched them laugh softly together, as if they were sharing some elegant secret. My daughter's white gown shimmered beneath the golden lights, and her grandmother's pearls glowed against her throat. She looked every bit the society bride she had always dreamed of being, and I, standing there in my navy dress that cost less than her shoes, was suddenly invisible in her eyes. But I wasn't as powerless as she thought. What Emily didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I carried something in my purse, a single folded letter, written in my late husband's shaky hand just days before he died. George had given it to me with strict instructions: "If Emily ever treats you with cruelty, read this aloud. Don't hide the truth. Helen, promise me." So as the laughter swelled and the orchestra played, I realized this moment had come. My heart was breaking, my cheeks were burning with humiliation, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet strength stirred. If my daughter wanted to erase me, to paint me as nothing but a failure, then she was about to learn that the truth has a way of speaking louder than lies. The wedding was the kind of spectacle I had only ever seen in glossy magazines stacked on the coffee table at the library where I worked. The Graves family estate sprawled across acres of manicured lawn, the kind where every blade of grass seemed ironed into place. White tents stretched across the gardens, lanterns swayed gently from the trees, and a string quartet played beneath a carved stone archway. Everywhere I looked, there were photographers and servers in black bow ties gliding through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. I had driven down from my little apartment in Vermont that morning, carefully pressing the navy dress I'd bought on sale months earlier, the nicest thing I owned. It wasn't designer, not even close, but it felt respectable, at least until I stepped into that sea of sequins, diamonds, and satin gowns that probably cost more than I made in a month. I caught sight of my reflection in a gilded mirror near the entrance and almost laughed. I looked like the librarian I had been all my life, practical and unadorned, in a room full of women who wore their wealth like a second skin. Emily was radiant. I'll give her that. She had chosen a vintage dress from her new husband's family collection, silk that whispered when she moved, lace so delicate I was afraid to breathe too close to it. She looked like she belonged to that world, to the Graves name, to their fortune and their legacy. And maybe that was the first moment I realized she didn't see herself as mine anymore. I sat quietly at a table toward the middle of the room, not near the head table where Nathaniel's relatives gathered, but not so far back that it looked intentional. My companions were distant cousins of the groom who spoke in polite, practiced tones about art galleries and European vacations. When they asked me where I lived, I answered truthfully, an apartment above a hardware store in a town with one stoplight. They smiled with kind eyes, but the conversation ended quickly after that. As the evening unfolded, I kept noticing little details, the kind that gnawed at me. Emily's laughter was too polished, her movements rehearsed, like she was playing a part she'd memorized long before the curtain ever rose. When the band struck up her father's favorite song, "The Way You Look Tonight," she didn't even glance toward the empty chair where I had placed George's photo. My chest tightened, watching her twirl in Nathaniel's arms as though her father's absence meant nothing more than a missing boutonniere. Everywhere around me, people toasted to love, to legacy, to the future. But I sat in silence, a quiet ache in my chest, wondering when exactly my daughter had begun to see me as something she needed to shed. The words I had overheard earlier echoed in my ears. She's nothing but a failure. And though my heart cracked a little more with each passing hour, I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the weight of George's letter resting inside. It happened just after the cocktail hour began, when the sun was sliding low and painting the garden in gold. I had stepped near the terrace doors, trying to escape the chatter about ski trips in Switzerland and charity galas I'd never be invited to. That's when I heard Emily's voice, clear as a bell, even over the music. She stood only a few feet away, her champagne glass glinting in the light, speaking to Margaret Graves, the new matriarch in her life. "Don't worry about her," Emily said, tilting her head slightly in my direction. "She's just a failure. She's never done anything worthwhile. She worked at a public library for decades. Can you imagine anything more depressing?" Margaret gave a polite, clipped smile, the kind that sliced sharper than a blade. "Well, at least she understands her place. Some people from simpler backgrounds can be pushy, trying to insert themselves where they don't belong." I felt my throat tighten, my heart hammering so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. My own daughter, the child I had raised through scraped knees, sleepless nights, and late-night calls from college when her rent was overdue, was standing there dismissing my life as though it were nothing more than wasted years. I wanted to walk over, to shake her shoulders and remind her of who I was, what I had given up so she could have the life she now flaunted. But my feet stayed rooted to the floor. Instead, I clutched my purse tighter, my nails pressing crescents into the fabric, the edges of George's letter crinkling beneath my hand. For a moment, I tried to convince myself I had misheard, that maybe she meant something else. But then Margaret's approving nod confirmed it. Emily had meant every word. The orchestra swelled with a waltz. Guests began drifting toward the dance floor, and I forced myself to slip back into the crowd. Smiles, nods, murmured congratulations. I moved through the motions like a ghost. Inside, though, something was breaking wide open. The girl who had once promised her dying father she'd take care of me was gone. In her place stood a woman determined to rewrite me out of her story, as if my existence was an inconvenience she needed to erase. And that was the moment I understood. George had seen something coming long before I had. Later that evening, while the guests danced beneath the chandeliers and laughter spilled across the marble floor, I slipped away into the mansion's library. The room smelled of polished wood and leather bindings, the kind of place where silence felt heavy and deliberate. I pulled the letter from my purse, the paper already soft at the edges from months of being carried everywhere I went. George's handwriting, shaky but still steady enough to recognize, sprawled across the page. "My dearest Helen," it began. "If you're reading this, it means Emily has shown you who she's become, not who she used to be. I know it will hurt, but I need you to see what I saw in those final weeks." My chest tightened as my eyes raced over his words. He described the questions Emily had asked him while he lay weak in bed, about our finances, about his will, about what would happen to me when he was gone. She had brought brochures from a place called Fairmont Haven, insisting it was only planning ahead. But George had seen the way her eyes flickered, the calculation in her tone. "She's worried about your future," she says. "But Helen, I don't think worry is the right word. She's planning something. I changed my will to protect you. Everything is in your name now. Promise me you'll never let her make you feel like you're a burden. You were the best choice I ever made in my life." By the time I reached the end, my hands were trembling. His signature, shaky but clear, stared back at me. Beneath it was a final line. "Don't let her put you away. Helen, you're stronger than you think." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. For a moment, the music from the ballroom drifted faintly into the room, the sounds of celebration clashing with the raw ache in my heart. George had known. Even as cancer ate away at him, he had seen our daughter changing into someone we barely recognized. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to my purse, my resolve hardening with every heartbeat. Emily might think she could erase me, that she could shove me aside into some polished facility while she lived her perfect new life. But George had given me more than words on a page. He had given me permission to fight back. When I stepped out of that library, the air felt different against my skin. The woman who had entered, humiliated and broken, wasn't the same as the one who walked back into the glittering chaos of the wedding. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet fire had been lit. 2 weeks after the wedding, Emily called me with a sweetness in her voice that instantly put me on guard. "Mom, let's have lunch. Just the two of us. There's a place in Manhattan I think you'll love." The restaurant was the kind I'd only seen on television. White tablecloths, candlelight at midday, and portions so small I wondered if they expected you to stop for a second meal afterward. Emily swept in wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne, glowing with the confidence of a woman newly married into wealth. "Mom, you look tired," she said as she kissed my cheek, her tone halfway between concern and criticism. "Are you sleeping enough? Eating well?" I smiled faintly, ordering a simple salad while she launched into stories of her honeymoon in Italy, the Graves family's summer home in the Hamptons, the charity boards Margaret was already introducing her to. Every detail of her life now sounded rehearsed, polished for an audience I wasn't a part of. Finally, after the waiter cleared our plates and poured coffee, she leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Mom, Nathaniel and I have been talking. We're concerned about your future. That apartment of yours is so small, and the neighborhood isn't safe anymore. You should be somewhere more appropriate." I set my cup down carefully. "Appropriate?" She nodded, the smile never faltering. "Secure, with medical services nearby, activities with people your age. Margaret knows of a wonderful senior community called Fairmont Haven, very exclusive. Normally, there's a long waiting list, but there's an opening next month." There it was, the name George had written in his letter. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Emily reached across the table and patted my hand as though she were the mother and I the child. "The best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about money. They have a program where you transfer your assets, and they guarantee care for life. Doesn't that sound perfect?" I kept my voice calm, though my pulse was pounding. "That's very thoughtful, Emily. But I'm not ready to make that decision. I enjoy living independently." Her smile tightened. Just for a second. "Mom, I understand it's hard to admit when you need help. But Dad's been gone 3 years now. You can't keep pretending you can do everything on your own." I gathered my purse slowly. "I'm not pretending. I am managing just fine." Her eyes narrowed, her voice edged with frustration. "And when you can't, when you fall or get sick or forget things, who do you expect to take care of you?" Her question hung between us like a blade. And in that moment, I understood exactly what this was about. Emily wasn't worried about my safety. She was terrified of the inconvenience I might become. When I arrived at Emily's house in Westchester, the atmosphere told me everything before a word was spoken. The living room felt staged, as if they had rehearsed this moment. Emily and Nathaniel sat close on the sofa, Margaret beside them, her posture regal. They motioned me to the lone armchair across from them. I might as well have been on trial. Margaret started, her voice smooth but firm. "Helen, we've noticed you've been a little forgetful lately. It happens at your age. Small lapses, but they add up. We think it's best to address them before they grow worse." Emily nodded, her eyes feigning concern. "Mom, you've missed calls, rescheduled appointments. We're only worried about you. That's why Nathaniel and I secured you a place at Fairmont Haven. It's safe. And they can give you everything you need." Nathaniel slid a folder across the coffee table. "These are just standard forms: power of attorney, asset transfer, healthcare directives. If you sign tonight, the transition can be smooth." I looked at the papers, then at their expectant faces. My pulse was steady, surprisingly calm. They thought they had cornered me, that I would fold beneath their pressure. But they had forgotten one thing. George's words still lived in my purse. Slowly, I reached for the worn envelope. "Before I sign anything, I'd like you to hear something." I unfolded the page, George's handwriting stretching across it like a lifeline. I read aloud his account of Emily bringing him brochures for Fairmont Haven while he was dying, of her questions about money and wills, of his decision to leave everything to me so I could not be pushed aside. Emily's face drained of color. Nathaniel's eyes darted to her, confusion flashing into anger. Margaret's perfect mask cracked, her fingers tightening in her lap. When I finished, silence pressed against the walls. Finally, Nathaniel spoke, his voice low. "Emily, is this true?" Emily stammered, reaching for excuses, but the words rang hollow. I slid the research I'd collected onto the table: state records, complaints, proof that Fairmont Haven preyed on grieving families. "This isn't about protecting me," I said quietly. "It's about controlling me, and I won't let that happen." For the first time all evening, I felt the balance shift. I was no longer the defendant. I was the witness, the judge, and the truth George had entrusted to me was the gavel. Emily's face drained of color as the last words of George's letter echoed in the room. For a long moment, no one moved. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed in confusion. Margaret stiffened like a statue, and Emily sat frozen, her hands twisting in her lap. "Dad didn't know what he was writing," she whispered finally. "He was weak, confused." I slipped the letter back into my purse, my voice steady. "Your father was many things, Emily, but confused was not one of them. Not about this." Nathaniel turned to her sharply. "You gave him nursing home brochures while he was dying? Emily, why?" Her composure cracked. "Because I was scared." The words burst out of her, raw and trembling. I watched him fade, and I realized it would be you next. I didn't think I could handle it. I thought if I arranged everything in advance, I wouldn't have to watch you fall apart. I wouldn't have to face it. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and for the first time in years, she looked vulnerable. No polished armor, no perfect smile. Just my daughter, terrified. I leaned forward. "Emily, you don't have to protect yourself by erasing me. I don't need a guardian. I need respect. I need to know you see me as a person, not a problem to be solved." She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I panicked. I thought I wasn't strong enough to take care of you the way you took care of Dad." The anger that had carried me through this confrontation gave way to something heavier. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. I reached across the table and laid my hand gently over hers. "You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to plan every outcome. All you had to do was ask. And if you had asked, Emily, I would have listened." The papers on the coffee table lay forgotten. The trap they'd set was broken, the power stripped away. For the first time all night, Emily met my eyes not with calculation, but with something far more fragile, the desperate hope of being forgiven. Weeks passed before Emily reached out again. This time there was no grand invitation, no staged performance. She simply called and asked if I would meet her for coffee. When I arrived, she looked different, tired, softer, as if the weight of all her carefully constructed walls had finally settled on her shoulders. She wrapped her hands around a mug, staring into the steam. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said quietly. "I had to understand why I was so desperate to push you into that place, why I thought controlling everything would make me feel safe." I let her talk, resisting the urge to fill the silence. She explained how she'd watched me take care of Dad, how helpless she had felt seeing him slip away, and how the thought of facing that again with me had terrified her. "I convinced myself the solution was to hand you off to someone else," she admitted. "It felt easier than risking failure." Her honesty was rough and imperfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, I heard not just my daughter's voice, but her fear, her shame, her longing to do better. "I don't need you to be perfect, Emily," I told her. "I just need you to ask me what I want before you decide my life for me." She nodded, tears welling. "Can we try again?" It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a start. We began meeting every week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just a phone call. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were honest. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the faint outlines of the bond we once had, slowly tracing themselves back into place. A year later, I found myself packing a suitcase I never thought I'd need. Folded sweaters, a new pair of walking shoes, and a guidebook to Ireland, George's dream destination, the trip we never managed to take together. Now, at 68, I was finally going, not as someone being sent away, but as a woman charting her own path. Emily came by that morning with coffee and a bag of pastries from the bakery we both loved. She sat on my couch, watching as I carefully zipped the suitcase. "Excited?" she asked. "Nervous, too," I admitted, smiling. "It's been a long time since I traveled farther than Vermont." Her expression softened. "Mom, I'm glad you're doing this. You deserve it." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for not giving up on me when you could have." I paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "I thought about it, Emily, but you're my daughter. Family doesn't mean ignoring mistakes, but it does mean giving each other the chance to be better." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but this time they weren't born of shame. They were filled with something closer to love. She hugged me, tightly, as though she feared letting go. As the taxi pulled up, I looked around my little apartment, the life I had built piece by piece. I thought of George's letter, of the night Emily had called me a failure, of the fire that had forced me to fight back. That letter hadn't just saved me, it had reminded me that my worth was never dependent on anyone's approval. Now, standing on the edge of a long-delayed adventure, I carried with me not only George's memory, but also the quiet triumph of knowing I had refused to disappear. My life was still mine to live, and that, above everything else, was the legacy he had wanted for me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.